Hey, what's happening, everybody? You're listening to Portraits in Color, a podcast that takes a unique look at race in America through the stories of artists, entrepreneurs, educators, and cultural critics. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Mirabal.
Welcome to Portraits in Color. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Mirabal. I'm here with a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Gregory Allen Webb. Greg Webb, as we know him. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, my brother?
I've been looking forward to this for a while.
This is going to be an interesting conversation, no doubt.
You know, some may say that there was some non-disclosure agreement signed right before this episode.
Some would say sheep tell lies, but we don't know.
They do tell lies.
I
Just
agree.
like your Los Angeles Rams, man, your Lambs. What happened to them this year?
Very disappointing, but I had low expectations, and so I was not too disappointed.
Kind of like your girlfriends have of you, right?
No comment.
Well, I wanted to talk about a subject that is near and dear to your heart, travel.
Yes.
And I mean, you're like the international man of mystery, as I know.
Not necessarily, but one thing that I'll draw attention to, there is a huge distinction between vacationing and traveling.
Yes, so we're going to dive into travel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's just start off from the top, man. When did you develop your love for travel?
I grew up a pretty simple life as a child, as you know. And, to me, travel was, the road trip to a neighboring state, Disneyland once. Mm-hmm. And actually, another near and dear friend of ours, my old roommate, Maury Roybal, he actually traveled to Europe probably in the late 90s. And I was living with him at that time. And he came back and he was just animated and said, man, there's a whole world out there. We need to hit the road. So I think it was the very next year we booked our first trip to Spain and Portugal. Mm-hmm. And that was right around 1999. And ever since then, it's just been a lifeblood that keeps me going.
How many countries have you been to right now?
I think I'm crawling towards 60. Of course.
60 countries?
60 countries. I've been very fortunate.
I've been to like maybe 60 counties.
Well, I've been to 60 counties as well, but I've been very fortunate that it's become such a big part of my life that I have dedicated energy into figuring out how to do it affordably, to do it consciously, and to do it in a way that all of a sudden the next trip is on the horizon, and it just sort of happens.
So we're in COVID restrictions, so there's been a lot of travel restrictions. So when was the last time that you actually traveled?
My last trip was right on the tail end of 2000. No, I lie. In 2019, actually, I went to Lebanon, which had been a lifelong dream of mine. And so I spent a couple weeks in Beirut, and then on the way back, I stopped to see a near and dear friend of mine in Belgium, which then led to a small side trip to Germany and a stop off in France on the way back. So.
Yeah. So you make a distinction between vacationing and traveling. So what is that distinction in your mind?
In the simplest terms, and we've all been on vacations, and more power to folks that enjoy going on vacations where you get to lay around a pool, you get to sort of be at a high-end resort perhaps, and that's all fine and dandy. Mm-hmm. That's no longer for me. I would say early in my travel evolution, it evolved into traveling where I live with locals. I've been known to be a couch surfer where I surf on people's couches. Mm-hmm. I've even been known to sleep on a park bench occasionally.
Or in a park. Under a tree.
Under a tree. Some of my best sack time comes under a park, under a tree.
And why are you against like air conditioning when you travel?
Well, it's overrated.
That's an inside story that we'll get into a little bit later. But
it's way overrated. The majority of the world doesn't have that luxury. And so a lot of times I just travel and live amongst the people and experience life through their eyes. And sometimes that's a little difficult to do if you're sitting in a high-end resort behind the walls where you really don't have interaction with the locals. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's a big part of why I enjoy traveling, is getting to learn people in their own environments, in their own homes, and getting to experience life through their eyes.
Mm-hmm. So for those that have never even left the United States, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned by traveling the world in terms of like the way that we live and like the way other cultures live?
Right. We're very fortunate as citizens of the United States, and I've always used that distinction. Yes, we are Americans, but there's also South Americans, North Americans, And so one of the things that I've learned is that people are people. Everybody's striving to survive and to be happy. And a lot of times through some of my journeys, I've been to some very interesting parts of the world that most people wouldn't go to. And in many instances, the most happiest, warm people come from those places. And, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. And to be able to share a meal or a beverage or adult beverage for those of you that partake. Or both. You tend to find that we have more in common than we have differences.
So what places like really left an indelible mark on you?
They're all very special and unique for different reasons.
Right.
I tend to be drawn more recently to a lot of Latin and South America because, in some instances it's easier because I speak Spanish and I studied Spanish in Colombia. And so that's sometimes a crutch because it's easy to sort of navigate.
Al derecho actually means to the right, though.
Correct.
We'll get to that.
We'll get
to that later.
We'll get to that a little bit later. But I've never been adverse to going pretty much anywhere in the world, quite honestly. I've been to the continent of Africa, a multitude of times. As I mentioned, my most recent sort of new trip was to Beirut, Lebanon,
Right.
which was just a phenomenal experience with so much rich history. And you being a musician could appreciate just so much rich music and music that you don't normally come across. The foods, the music, the people, is a recipe for just a very enjoyable time.
Best place you ever been for music?
Well, local music or compilation of music?
Let's start with like local.
Local music, Latin America, Colombia has some amazing music. Obviously, our trip to Havana, Cuba was pretty special in terms of just being able to hear so many types of music and varieties, which just this richness, a blending of both African and Latin cultures. And so those are pretty special. But then again, you get into the Middle East and you have a different style and sound. And so, unfortunately, I don't have a musical bone in my body, although I aspire to play the triangle one of these days. And
some say that you're pretty good at cowbell.
Well,
I heard that you were the bass player for Travis Tritt at one point.
Well, I think that would be a great story for another time. And so,
right.
But I think that because I am not musically inclined, I have a love for music that is, I like to believe, is pretty unique. And fortunately, unfortunately, as I play some of these musics from around the world, around some of my friends, they're a little shocked and surprised because it sounds they've never heard. But for musicians, I'm sure that it's something that you can appreciate.
Yeah, so once these travel restrictions are lifted, what is the first trip on the itinerary?
Any place. I have my sites.
I heard you wanted to go to Algodones.
Well, that's high on the list. There are some parts of the United States I still haven't been to. I love the national parks, but I'll most likely go back to Latin America.
Okay, what country in particular?
Most likely, if I play my cards right and things work out well, I could see myself being in Colombia soon.
Yeah.
Very soon, hopefully.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to dive deeper into his travel experiences, and I think there's going to be some associated stories that people are going to want to hear.
Perhaps.
All right, stay tuned. Welcome back. So now that the non-disclosure agreements have been signed and executed, we're ready to continue.
Let's rock and roll.
I want to dive deeper into your travel experiences. So we prepared some photos.
Wasn't me. I'm photoshopped in.
Well, we'll answer that question in a minute. So we got some photos. So I want you to describe the photo and the story behind each photo to give people a sense to like this trip. So this first photo right here, two handsome young men.
Absolutely.
In a pink Bel Air, I think that is. So where was that picture taken?
That picture is actually from Havana, Cuba, as you know, because if you notice the young man sitting next to me, that would be you.
He's a very striking young man.
He is a very striking young man.
Yeah.
And so that picture was taken in Havana, Cuba. Of course, we've all seen sort of stories, movies, videos of the richness of Cuba. And fortunately enough, a few years ago, we mapped out a trip and were able to actually visit the island. It was towards the end of the Obama administration, And I felt that hopefully things were going to really strengthen between our two countries. And of course, we know that unfortunately right now we can't travel to Cuba. But that trip to Havana, as we were talking about rich music and culture earlier, was just a phenomenal experience for me. Not only because I got to do it with my brother here,
Right.
but also because the people were just so welcoming. And I think that growing up, we're sort of sensitized to these stories of how it's this, god-awful place, but when in reality, the Cubans have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. Churning out top-notch doctors that have been deployed, during COVID to a multitude of countries around the world. And I don't know if you felt the same way, but I never felt so welcome.
Probably the most welcoming culture that I've ever been around. The music was exceptional.
Right.
In terms of, you're talking about local towards or like national, their music is a treasure and it's everywhere. Do you remember when we were on the beach and there was this like traveling little trio and the guy was lugging around the big upright bass,
Stand-up bass.
On the beach. So he's dragging it through the sand and what they are able to do with minimal resources.
Absolutely.
And so it was just an amazing trip. It's a place that I want to go back to real soon.
Absolutely. I actually felt that I was going to turn around and go right back. But then, of course, we had a change in administrations, and it wasn't quite possible. But I felt like we only barely scratched the surface of what the Cuban people have to offer.
And one of the things that people don't know is, so like we flew into Havana. I spent 10 days there. I think you spent a little bit longer there. One thing, though, is we had in mind that we wanted to see other parts of the island. But what people don't understand is when you go to Cuba, it's not like you can just go to a rental car place, rent a car, drive down the coast.
Or a Vespa.
Or a Vespa, which we'll get to in a minute, right? So why don't we get to this next picture? Let's see what else. Oh, so what do we have here? It looks like, were you playing trombone in the band here? Or what's going on here?
They tried to get me to play trombone, but I was on traveling at the time. This picture actually comes from Guča, Serbia. And for a lot of folks, one, they may or may not know where Serbia is as a country. It's one of the countries that were part of the former Republic of Yugoslavia. And so after the breakup of Yugoslavia, each of the countries, in a very interesting setup, sort of self-designed their borders. And so I happened to be in Belgrade, because it's one of those things. I was on a train.
You just automatically land where the party's at, right?
Well, it finds me, I think.
It finds you, yes.
And
you're like a magnet for that.
And so I was traveling throughout, the former republics and found myself in Belgrade. I was staying at a hostel because, again, I try and just sort of inexpensively travel and have the least amount of footprint while having an opportunity to meet people. And as I was meeting people for those beverages again, it's the strangest thing.
I see a pattern of behavior here.
People kept saying, you must go to Guča. And I'm like, where's Guča? And they said, don't matter. Go to the bus station, tell them you want a ticket to Guča. And I was like, what is this Guča you speak of?
Right.
They said, it's the world's largest trumpet festival. And I said, oh, okay. I don't read Cyrillic language because in Serbia they use Cyrillic language. And so I meandered down to the bus station and stepped up to the window, and nobody really spoke English, but I just said, Guča, one. And the woman's eyes lit up, and so she took a minimal amount of money from me. She hands me this ticket and points to like, go stand over there. And so here I am with my ticket, and I'm like, I guess I'm going to Guča.
Looking at my Gucci, it's about that time.
Exactly. And so I get on this bus, and as we stopped in all these towns, more and more people were getting on this bus. And, I'm not so sure that we weren't over capacity, but we drive into this sort of like valley, and here would be what I would come to find out would be around 200,000 of my newest friends. And I'm sure that I had to be the only person from the United States there. I get off the bus, there's gypsies dancing, there's these trumpets, and there's these bands, which sort of reminded me a little bit of mariachis, because a lot of horn.
Or New Orleans.
But every place you go, and so as the sun was going down, I might have had some local beverages of the local folks, and I was meeting all these people. And as people would talk to me, they'd realize that I was from the United States, so they would insist, and I mind you, they would insist on buying me a shot of the local rakia.
This couldn't be good.
It was great,
But
actually.
did your liver rebel?
Well, that's later,
Okay.
you know. But what I found myself is the night wore on, you know, we're dancing, you know, the local dance. And then I started thinking, I don't even know where I'm at, like in this country.
I've been in my country and been in that position, but rock and roll's a hell of a,
Well,
it's an occupation.
It is. And so I'm like, where am I going to sleep tonight? You know? And I wasn't getting too nervous, but I noticed that buses kept coming in packed.
Yeah.
But I realized that there weren't very many buses leaving with anybody. And so, you know, I started to get a little worried around 10 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
But they kept feeding me shots. And so I kept dancing.
All is good.
Well, around midnight rolls
And you'll
around.
sweat it out.
I'm starting to say, okay, where am I going to
That's how the story goes.
sleep?
You sweat it out.
You do sweat it out. And
Yes.
so I'm like wondering where I'm going to sleep.
Yeah.
And so I went back to where the bus dropped me off, and I kept asking Belgrade, and they said, no, you're in Gucha, you know. And I, Belgrade, I need to get back to Belgrade. So I was getting ready to like literally sleep in a field, because you know it sort of reminded me, had I been alive for like Woodstock, it sort of had that kind of vibe. And you know,
Hopefully you had a little bit more clothing on than they did at Woodstock.
well, we'll just leave it at that. But you know, so I looked around and I was like, okay, I have a couple of options. One, I could sleep over here in this field. I could, you know, saunter up to one of these young ladies who's, you know, may offer me a place to sleep for the night. Or I need to figure out how to get out of here, because of course I didn't pack anything in terms of like a backpack,
Right.
sleeping bag, nothing. And around 1 o'clock in the morning rolls around, and I keep asking, you know, these buses that are arriving. I'm like, Belgrade, how do I get to Belgrade? And so they said, there's a bus at 2 o'clock. You must be here. And, you know, so I stood there. I got on that first bus, and I was like, Belgrade. And they said, no, Belgrade. I said, no, Belgrade. So they just said, get on. And so they take me to this other city, which to this day, I don't know where I was at. It was probably 2 hours away from Gucha. And they dropped me at a bus station that's closed. Everything's in Cyrillic. And so literally that night I slept on a park bench inside that bus station. And around 5 o'clock in the morning, another bus comes. And, you know, I've ran with the bulls in Spain. It was a mad dash to get on that bus to get back to Belgrade. And so when I arrived back in Belgrade, miraculously, probably around 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm tired. I probably was sobering up. And I get back to my hostel, and the little woman at the front desk was like, oh, you went to Gucha. How was it?
Right.
And I looked at her, and I was so tired. I smiled, and I knew that I'd conquered Gucha, and I went and I passed out for several hours. But what I've come to find out is that Miles Davis actually played there.
Wow.
Back in the day. And a quote from him, you know, I'll probably butcher it, but that he didn't know people could play trumpet like that. From a musical standpoint, phenomenal. From a festival standpoint, amazing. Where it's at, no idea.
Well, one day we'll find it on a map.
We will.
So let's wrap up this segment with a picture of you on a Vespa.
Oh boy.
There's a picture of you circulating, about ready to get on a Vespa. And I happened to be on this trip. This was
You're taking the picture. When
I'm
in
the one taking the
reality,
picture.
you should probably be in this picture.
Right, yeah, but I was taking the picture with my grainy iPhone 1 maybe at the time.
You were the only one that had an iPhone.
I was the only
back
one that
then.
had an iPhone. We can get to that in a second. But here you are about to get on a Vespa. This is Barcelona, Spain, and this is 2009. And if you remember, the day that this picture was taken was the day, I believe, that Michael Jackson passed away.
You are correct.
We learned about Michael Jackson's passing while we were on the beach in Barcelona. But walk me through this day.
So we're renting Vespas in this picture here, and what Frank fails to tell you, or he hasn't mentioned yet, and I'll take 50% of the credit for never riding a Vespa before, and Frank had never ridden a Vespa, and then a third musketeer of sorts, Paul Guterres, another friend of ours who was on the same trip. He was the only one that ridden a motorcycle, and
Right.
if anybody's been to Barcelona or most places in Europe where there's a lot of Vespas, well, I'll say it, I'm a single man.
Right.
There's a lot of cute women on Vespas in cute summer dresses, and it seems pretty easy. I've ridden a bicycle. Has to be the same, right? And so when somebody suggests that we rent Vespas to see Barcelona, I didn't want to be the person to hold us back and say, I've never ridden a Vespa. So I said, yeah, I've ridden one.
I lied too.
And come to find out, Frank
lied
was
too.
in a similar situation. And so shortly after this picture, Frank may recall, and it's etched in my mind, he proceeded to ramp his Vespa off the curb into the street. And the woman was like, "You okay?" And, Frank was like, "Oh, yeah, I haven't been on one in a while."
Oh, yeah. I gave it too much gas.
Right. And so we proceeded to sort of drive on our way to the beach.
Right.
And we stopped to look at a paper map because back then, if you remember, there was no GPS.
No.
Frank was the only one with a mobile phone. He was living large with his iPhone.
Yeah.
Me and Paul didn't have phones. And so we stopped to look at a map. And Frank may or may not have had a slight collision with Mr. Paul and may or may not have taken off. I believe it was a mirror or a blinker.
Right. So the way that it went was like I was on it and it was like I didn't know how much gas to give. So I actually gave too much gas, ran into Paul's Vespa and broke a taillight on a rented Vespa. So I'm freaking out. I'm like, dude, we just rented this Vespa and I broke the damn taillight. How am I going to fix this?
Yep. And I remember calming Frank down and we said, well, let's just make our way to the beach. We'll get a Coca-Cola, which we did. And at that point, everybody was playing Michael Jackson everywhere. I remember being at the beach and we talked a little bit about, okay, we're fessing up. We've never been on a Vespa before. And so Paul's like mortified probably, but we grew up at interesting places. We're pretty resourceful.
Right.
And we said, let's go to Park Gall up there.
Up the hill.
Up the hill. And so we make our way up the hill to Park Gall, which for those of you who've been to Barcelona is a must-see.
Right.
And what was really fun and, almost unbridled fun, that we were taking a lot of back streets, we were gaining confidence riding our Vespas, and we had told ourselves,
keep going down, you'll eventually get to the coastline.
well, but wait, we needed to find some super glue because we needed to repair the Vespa.
We needed to repair the Vespa. So we find a spot, and it's like, hey, guess what? They have super glue. Get the super glue, put it on the light, attach it back to the Vespa, good as new.
We're on our way.
We're on our way.
We get to Park Gall.
We're not going to have to pay any insurance costs or anything.
We're living large.
Yes.
And so our confidence level's growing. And around that time, U2 was kicking off their 360 tour in Barcelona a couple days later. And I had never been to the soccer stadium where the match was going to be. And so we said, why don't we take our Vespas?
Camp Nou, right?
Camp Nou. Why don't we take our Vespas and just sort of scope out the neighborhood and see where this concert's going to be at? And so I put my headphones on. The confidence level's high again. Frank's happy.
Yeah.
Vespa's repaired.
Vespa's repaired.
We arrived there to just a blessing, quite honestly.
Right.
Which was U2 doing a sound check, in essence, a live concert. And so at this point, one of us, I think, was saying, this is one of the best days of our life, right?
Right.
And right around that time, I think it might have been you with your iPhone. You're like, well, we need to get these Vespas back. Where is back? We said, well, we'll just go down.
Follow the coastline.
The beach is down there. The rental shop is down there. And so we proceed to leave. And I'll never forget, because it's etched in my mind, what happens next. It starts sprinkling in Barcelona, which those of you who've been to Barcelona, doesn't rain very often. So when it does, oil comes up off of the streets.
Get slick.
You add that into the recipe of most rental Vespas, not the best tires. And so if you can visually picture, Paul's in front because he's the most experienced Vespa rider. I'm in the middle, probably following 20 yards behind him. And then Frank's bringing up the rear. And so we're going down this hill, and I'll never forget saying, we're being blessed because it's sprinkling on us.
Yep.
And I go to hit the brakes, and I skid a little bit. And so I'm like, uh-oh, I need to stop before the bottom of the hill. And so I say, okay, let's see what happens. And so luckily I had never ridden a Vespa. So those of you that have ridden motorcycles and Vespas would probably be predisposed to put your arm down or your foot down. But I literally, it was like a cartoon. It was like a cartoon, Frank. I went down
all a cartoon.
Like in one swell piece.
Right.
And hit and was skidding. I was wrecking.
So here's the horror, right? So I'll take it from there.
Please do.
So Greg is sliding down the hill. Paul is in the middle, and he's like, oh, snap. So he turns back to look behind him to see if I was all right, and he wipes out.
Yep.
Car's coming, he's wiped out, And then I'm the third one. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. They wiped. I'm the least experienced of the bunch. So I try to slow down and I'm like, I'm going to take the Vespa and put it up on the curb. So I hit the gas just to get up on the curb. I hit it too hard and I rammed the Vespa into a stone wall, jack up my hand. And then if you remember at that point, we all dust ourselves off with, this isn't funny anymore, man.
Well,
This ain't funny anymore, man.
this is true, but let me add one little piece of recollection on my part, which
right.
could be verified by Paul.
Okay.
Frank was like, this ain't funny, man. I got a wife and kids at home. I don't want to have to call your dad saying you got killed in Barcelona. This ain't funny. They can come get these Vespas. We ain't taking them back.
Right. Yep. That's about right.
And so after cooler heads prevailed, we said, why don't we just go to the bottom of the street so we can figure out where we're at?
Right.
And again, for those of you that haven't ridden Vespas, don't try this at home.
Right.
But we slowly started getting confidence again.
Mm-hmm.
And they should have never let me lead because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going. And before you know it, I find myself in a tunnel. And I'm
Wait, there's a
thinking,
precursor to that. Okay, so the three of us are we come to a stop and you're in front. And so you are our official translator, right?
I had not studied Spanish
So
at that point.
yeah, and so you asked the cab driver, he was like, okay, which way back to Las Ramblas, right?
Yep.
And he was like, al derecho. And he was like, so Greg turns back and looks at it, he goes, yeah, let's go left. So we end up in a speed tunnel.
Speed tunnel.
Take it from there.
And so again, we're staggered. It's me in the front because they got to keep an eye on me. And then it's Paul and then Frank's in the back. And a good 20, 30 yards in between us. And when we exited the tunnel, we found ourselves on the highway, on the inner lane of a fast-moving highway. And of course, I'm, a little shaky. I had to put my, the handlebars back in place. And I'm like, I need to get off this highway. And we must have been going 50 miles an hour maybe.
Right.
And so I make my way over and I get off on the exit. And I'm at the top of the exit and I see Paul make his way over, get off on the exit. And then we see Frank stuck
I'm blocked in
the inner lane and he's just going straight. And of course we don't have cell phones and we're saying, oh my God, Frank's gonna kill us because he was the one that has the wife and kids. And now I'm thinking, how am I gonna call Tess? This is not good.
Right.
And so me and Paul make our way to a bar. And we're frantically asking people, can we use your cell phone? Because cell phones weren't that prevalent back then.
Right.
And luckily we found a table of young ladies who said, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And so we called Frank and he had made his way back to the room.
Yep. Good thing that I spoke fluent Spanish, made my way back to the room. And I'm kicking around, I was like, hey, I'm relaxed. I don't know where you guys are at. What's this all about, right?
Yep.
And then we had a very cathartic dinner that night.
We did.
Talked about all of our deep stories and
Yeah.
near-death experiences. Because one thing that we failed to mention, and there was a roundabout where I almost got taken out by a bus, if you remember. I had one leg sticking out, just trying to brace myself for impact because the bus is about to take me out in a roundabout. But anyways, an incredible experience. Right?
Incredible experience, and I, relive that experience often. And subsequently in Thailand, other places, I've rented Vespas, and it's never been the same.
It's never been the same.
But I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything in the world.
Right. So before we end, we're going to do one more segment. We're going to talk about how you can travel effectively across the world on a limited budget. So stay tuned. All right, we're back. So this last segment, Greg, we don't have a lot of time left, man. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about your business, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I mean, that Vespa story had to be told in its entirety.
It did.
Unedited, right?
Unedited.
So let's start off by travel tips. So many people have this belief that it takes tremendous amount of resources to travel, and then by what they need to know about your traveling, because you and I are friends, we've traveled to several countries together. You will rarely do a trip that's less than a couple of months, right?
Right.
Very rarely. And so why don't you give our audience a few tips in terms of how they can travel in an affordable way and turn it into a lifestyle like you have.
Well, first and foremost, luck. There's a lot of luck involved.
Right.
I'm a reformed couch surfer for those of you that don't know.
So what is couch surfing?
Couchsurfing is an exchange, an online exchange of probably 6 or 7 million people all over the world, where I have a 2-bedroom condo, and so I offer my extra room for travelers to stay in for free. And so the reciprocal effect is when you travel, you can request to stay with people for free. And so that was the primary driver for cutting down my expense. But more importantly for me, as I mentioned earlier, it's about meeting people and local people. And so that, and then of course with the invent of Airbnb, that made a different sort of travel options available. But my big secret, and I tell anybody who will listen, I brew my own coffee at home. I buy beans, I grind them. One, it's better tasting in my opinion. 2, it's less affordable than going to a big box coffee place like Starbucks every day, because you can easily burn through $10 on your Frappuccino, whatever. I could make that at home for pennies on the dollar. And I take that cost savings just from coffee, and put it into a travel fund. And once a year, it usually can pay for a trip.
Wow.
That, I use frequent flyer miles like everybody else. And so I charge a lot of my stuff on, my various credit cards that provide miles back to me. And then because of the internet, I have all these tracking apps that send me low-cost airlines. And so all of those things. Then the one final tip that I'll give people, and to me, it's the most wonderful way to travel. In the morning, I brew my own coffee wherever I'm staying at. I've been known to sort of take little packs of oatmeal just because breakfast isn't really a big meal for me. Lunchtime, I go to the local deli or the farmer's market, buy me something to have a picnic at a beach or at a park. And then in the evening, I have a sensible dinner. And, for some people, they may not be comfortable with that. But for me, I'm tasting local foods. I'm tasting organic foods. I'm, enjoying just immersing myself in the culture.
Yeah, and all amazing tips. So let's end with talking a little bit about the work that you do so you can actually have some resources to do some of your travels. So you are an entrepreneur. You run a small company called Global Stocks. Talk a little bit about the company.
Absolutely, and even that has a travel story attached to it. I was in South Africa in 2010 at the World Cup soccer tournament, and I'd met a gentleman here who oftentimes when I'm going to a new country, I'll ask all my friends and family, does anybody know anybody in South Africa? Or do you have a friend there? So that I could have a local contact, and then they could help me navigate. But I did that same call out, and I actually met my business partner that way. I met a gentleman named Dr. Bradford Lau, who at the time was just somebody else going to the World Cup. And so we swapped an email, said if we're ever in the same city, we'll hang out. And we actually were in Johannesburg for the finals. I picked him up. I had a rental car. He didn't. We went to see where Mandela was sworn in Pretoria. Did the whole, going to Soweto and looking at Mandela's house. And over a beverage, tailgating, jokingly we said we should start a company. And that led to what's now been 11 years of a business partnership with him. He's my business partner. And we invented a piece of safety equipment called the safety sock. And so it's this reflective piece of material that hangs on the outside mirror of a vehicle for emergency roadside situations, for fleet vehicles, for transportation workers. Because of course the issue is near and dear to my heart because of the number of people injured on roadsides. But it also then fed into this now love that I have for travel. And because I can work from anywhere, as long as there's Wi-Fi, I also do some light consulting, as you know. And so my life has just been structured around enjoying things that money can't buy.
Well, and the genesis of the company too, right? So when you were at the World Cup in South Africa, and you start seeing like the logos of some of their football clubs displayed on the mirrors of cars,
on the outside mirrors of vehicles. And so as folks see those things, that would be my company. And so very serendipitous. Never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be doing this. I actually wanted to do development work in Africa when I left working for state government. And one thing led to another, and here I sit telling my story. And I've been very fortunate to just sort of roll with the punches. And there's highs and lows in everything. But I have found that even while on the road where you know nobody, the generosity of people, whether it's for directions or being welcomed into a family's home for a meal, like I was in Istanbul during Ramadan. If you're willing to have an openness to allow people into your world, it's amazing the people that you'll meet who've now become lifelong friends.
Yeah. That's a great place to end. So, Greg, my brother from another mother, thank you so much for being on the show.
You bet. It's been a pleasure.
I'm glad that you signed that non-disclosure agreement, man, and agreed to be on the show.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So thank you for tuning in to Portraits in Color. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Miraval. You can follow me on social media at Frank Miraval on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to check out the show on your favorite podcasting platform. So we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you check out podcasts. So until next time, peace.